Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
I feel like I'm in the barrel with a bunch of my friends, and the barrel's about to go over Niagara Falls, and as soon as it starts going, you just gotta be peaceful because you don't know what's gonna happen, right? And it's not up to you. We're all gonna woo, or as they do in the cartoons, yahoo.
They're not first and foremost gatekeepers, and their conceptualization and presentation of themselves as a gatekeeping class is itself, I would suggest, a yet another fantasy that they spin, which is what they really do.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Roundtable, the Publishers and Editors podcast. Here at the Claremont Institute's publication, The American Mind, I'm joined, as always, who am I? I'm Ryan Williams, president of the Claremont Institute, publisher of the Claremont Review of Books and The American Mind. I'm joined by Matthew Peterson, founding editor of The American Mind, and our vice president of education, Spencer Clavin, newly promoted associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books and The American Mind, and David Barr, managing editor of The American Mind. Although we have a slight announcement to make. David has not been demoted at all. We are searching for a new managing editor. He has been, for a while, quietly and silently, we haven't announced it, but he's been doing the work of our director of publications, which is a comms position handling both of our publications. So he's going to do a little more of that work. We're expanding at The American Mind. We've got too much stuff to do. So it's a lateral move for David, but he'll still be a regular on the podcast, and we're grateful to him. And then James Pullis, executive editor of The American Mind. Well, let's get started. I just wanted to open today with this interesting piece in the New York Times titled, "Trump Had One Last Story to Sell. The Wall Street Journal Wouldn't Buy It." I will withhold the author of this piece for the moment because it's an extraordinary document and the reveal is fun. So the author recounts the genesis of a few folks around the Trump campaign and Trump White House trying to seed into the media ecosystem this Hunter Biden story as a way of boosting their prospects in November, while also, I think, under their own understanding, revealing what seems palpably obvious to a lot of us, which is the corruption of the Biden family, including the big man himself, Mr. Joe. So he goes through in the first section of recounting this meeting that happened in McLean, Virginia, at someone's house, and the selling of this to a Wall Street Journal reporter, not to be confused with a Wall Street Journal opinion columnist. A lot of people don't know this, but relevant to this whole story is that the Wall Street Journal newsroom and that whole apparatus, as we measure these things across media, is much more liberal than the op-ed page. So just keep that in your back pocket. Anyway, they were trying to sell him on this story. Tony Bobulinski, I don't know how to pronounce that guy's name, that's close enough, was on the call. And so they tried to set it all up. The Journal took the stuff, including this treasure trove of emails and recordings, et cetera, and went to work. At some point during the week that followed, Rudy Giuliani got worried about it coming out and decided to release it all himself because it was in his possession. Bannon started leaking it to various friendly media operations, and the communications operation around getting this into the ecosystem of American media was underway. And it kind of undermined the ability or the desire of the original parties at this Virginia home to get it into a more trusted, quote unquote, mainstream publication like the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal was still sort of chewing it over. And then Bobulinski himself, according to the author of this, got nervous that it wasn't going to come out in time. So the day before the debate, that was last Thursday. Was it last Thursday? Mm-hmm. Last Thursday. He released a statement detailing some of his interactions with the Biden family. He was CEO of a company they set up, China relations, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of you have seen some of the details of this. That's the setting for all of this. So I just want to read the middle portion of this piece, and then we can reveal the author and have a good laugh and just talk about the odd nature of this whole business in 2016 election and now in 2020. So this middle section is entitled, a subhead, "The Gatekeepers Return." The McLean Group's failed attempt to sway the election is partly just another story revealing the chaotic, threadbare quality of the Trump operation, a far cry from the coordinated disinformation machinery feared by liberals. But it's also about a larger shift in the American media, one in which the gatekeepers appear to have returned after a long absence. It has been a disorienting couple of decades, after all. It began when the Drudge Report, Gawker, and the blog started telling you what stodgy old newspapers and television networks wouldn't. Then social media brought floods of content pouring over the old barricades. By 2015, the old gatekeepers had entered a kind of crisis of confidence, believing they couldn't control the online news cycle any better than King Canute could control the tides. Television networks all but let Donald Trump take over as executive producer that summer and fall. In October 2016, Julian Assange and James Comey seemed to drive the news cycle more than the major news organizations. Many figures in old media and new bought into the idea that in the new world, readers would find the information they wanted to read, and therefore decisions by editors and producers about whether to cover something and how much attention to give it didn't mean much. But the last 2 weeks have proved the opposite, that the old gatekeepers like the Journal can still control the agenda. It turns out there is a big difference between WikiLeaks and establishment media coverage of WikiLeaks, a difference between a Trump tweet and an article about it, even between an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal suggesting Joe Biden had done bad things and a news article that didn't reach that conclusion. You can see the distinction I drew between op-ed and news. Yeah. Sorry, I missed one page here. Perhaps the most influential media document of the last 4 years is a chart by a co-editor of the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard, Yochai Benkler. The study showed that a dense new right-wing media sphere had emerged and that the mainstream news, quote, revolved around the agenda that the right-wing media sphere set. Then there's discussion of Bannon's approach, blah, 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 blah. And then we get to this, and we're almost to the end here. So USA Today didn't want to run my Hunter Biden column this week, the conservative writer Glenn Reynolds, that's a funny labeling of Glenn Reynolds, I think, complained October 20th, posting the article instead to his blog. President Trump himself hit a wall when he tried to push the Hunter Biden narrative onto CBS News. This is 60 Minutes, and we can't put on things we can't verify, Leslie Stahl told him. Mr. Trump then did more or less the same thing as Mr. Reynolds, posting a video of his side of the interview to his own blog, Facebook. The media's control over information, of course, is not as total as it used to be. The people who own printing presses and broadcast towers can't actually stop you from reading leaked emails or unproven theories about Joe Biden's knowledge of his son's business. But what Mr. Benkler's research showed was that the elite outlet's ability to set the agenda endured in spite of social media. Blah, blah, blah. So the Biden thing was killed. It was not going to get the attention that the Trump camp wanted it to. And then in conclusion, last subhead, on the other side of the gate. There's something amusing, even a bit flattering, in such earnest protestations from a right-wing movement rooted in efforts to discredit the independent media. And this reassertion of control over information is what you've seen many journalists call for in recent years. At its best, it can also close the political landscape to a trendy new form of dirty tricks, as in France in 2017, where the media largely ignored a last-minute dump of hacked emails from President Emmanuel Macron's campaign just before a legally mandated blackout period. But I admit that I feel deep ambivalence about this revenge of the gatekeepers. I spent my career before arriving at the Times in March on the other side of the gate, lobbing information past it to a very online audience who I presumed had already seen the leak or the rumor, and seeing my job as helping to guide that audience through the thicket, not to close their eyes to it. The media's new and unfamiliar job is to provide a framework for understanding the wild, unvetted, and incredibly intoxicating information that its audience will inevitably see, not to ignore it. My colleague John Herman, also now at the Times, and I wrote in 2013. In 2017, I made the decision to publish the unverified Steele dossier, in part on the grounds that gatekeepers were looking at it and influenced by it, but keeping it from their audience. The author of this, for those in the know, given the either because they read it or given the subject matter listed here, is Ben Smith, formerly of BuzzFeed. So this is why I think this is an extraordinary document. The extolling of the return of the gatekeepers, and then this weird little retrenchment at the end and plea for moderation with some new new consensus, moderate conclusion, or synthesis at the end, which is, the old BuzzFeed types and the old Wild West of the internet and independent, disintermediated media having a role to play, while at the same time the gatekeepers controlling the narrative. Ben Smith is now well paid at the Times and fulfilling his role quite nicely.
That was riveting, Ryan. And I'm not joking. I was hooked on every word. I haven't read this piece yet, so this was all new information to me. It was riveting in the way that one is riveted when a mentally unwell person sort of really expands in great detail on his fantasies about the world. I mean, when that happens, both out of compassion and out of genuine interest, one attempts to sort of sift through the ravings to understand kind of what this person, how the actual reality of the world is filtering through this person's sort of disordered mind to create this fantasy. And that's what that sound, almost exactly, that's what the experience of listening to that was like for me. I mean, here is a person who was, it seems, quite legitimately involved in sort of the first wave of digital media unsettling the media landscape that had previously existed. He has now been thoroughly captured, as indeed BuzzFeed itself has been. This is an important dimension that he leaves out, that BuzzFeed is not still in that position, if it ever really quite was, of kind of renegade journalism, but has become itself one of the part of the media apparatus that exists to obscure rather than to illuminate what is going on at the moment. And out of the rapidly slipping grip of that media apparatus, which consists not only of the Times and the Washington Post and the kind of old guard of dissimulators, televisual dissimulators, but also of places like BuzzFeed, and I would include, Slate in this, and journals and online publications that have become, that have joined the team of people that don't want you to believe your lying eyes. As those people's grip slips ever more and the mask comes off and the New York Post is obviously shut out of its Twitter account for however many days, and the Hunter Biden story appears and then is just beaten into the ground, and the opposite effect from the desired one occurs, such that more and more people pay attention to what is potentially, again, still a developing story, but was potentially a bombshell, right? There evolves in front of our eyes this deranged story. And we're in a weird position where that story has the potential to be very infuriating and very damaging, that those people who hold that old institutional power can still shape this election in meaningful ways, can still twist and distort the way that normal people view the world in very powerful ways, can still exert, they shouldn't be taken lightly as opponents of the people, as enemies of the people, to quote our president. However, they are also at the same time part of a dynamic that is soon to sweep them from the world. I mean, the fact that the actual renegade media, the actual digital media, people, again, as we've said now multiple times in this podcast, like Tim Pool and Andy Ngo, people who are out there, and Twitch journalists who are out there actually documenting what's going on structurally, just in terms of what's happening, they're going to win. It's just a question how much damage this lunatic raving is going to do in the interim. And it's fascinating to watch them cling to that, although somewhat grim.
As much as I agree with all of that foregoing, I would caution slightly that the speed with which the narrative ruling class crumbles may be quite rapid, but in geological time. I mean, we could have a couple generations here of what we had when the printing press came around, which was protracted religious war. And there's, I think, an interpretation of the American Civil War, the first American Civil War, that conflict was in essence a religious war. And I think it would be, not a bad bet to lay money on the idea that we are headed into a period of fresh religious conflict. It's obvious now that that wokeness is becoming a sort of religion, complete with churches, some of which are actual churches, but others which are not, and a priestly class, and mortification rituals, and all the rest. And so while the digital medium does do an effective job of disenchanting the kind of narrative control that we saw back in the TV days, and the scramble to maintain that control oftentimes makes some of these media goons look like the goons they are. What takes place? What takes the place of that kind of high-powered fantasy work and narrative spinning is religion. If you push that kind of fantasy making far enough and hard enough, it will flip, as Marshall McLuhan might have said, into out-and-out religious practice. And while that has seemed like something that would generically be good news for the right, it may not be unallied good news for the right, because I think we're beginning to see the rise of real radical left religious organizations, and that's something we haven't seen in a long time, maybe ever. And so it's a source of satisfaction to many of us to see the internal contradictions of the narrative weaving class come to light in a way that reveals their latent weakness and ridiculousness. But I do see some storm clouds on the horizon.
Yeah, that's well put, James. I just love Matt wants to jump in here, but I just love the delicious irony of Ben Smith, publisher of the Steele dossier, which actually, as we've come to find out, and many of us suspected, is a product of Russian disinformation, extolling the virtues of the Wall Street Journal and others for blocking the Hunter Biden revelations, among other reasons, as they've floated around the media environment and their justifications for it, because they feared it was Russian disinformation. My favorite was the letter from 50 plus former intelligence community officials that basically concluded, well, we think this might be Russian disinformation because it certainly looks like it. But even if it isn't, we should treat it as such. I mean, that's more or less was their conclusion. So the wonderful juxtaposition of Ben Smith's migration from BuzzFeed over to the New York Times, his defense of gatekeepers, mixed with his lame sort of defense of what he hopes will be the continuation of others outside of his cushy job speaking the truth, all in the context of the last 4 years and the very just sort of upside down world and quasi traitorous machinations of our media and their involvement with anonymous leakers from the intelligence community. It's all just too good to lay before us.
No, and I think it's so tortured. That's why he knows better. He has said as much in the past as he alludes to at the end. And I love the phrase, does a lot of work here, but I admit that I feel deep ambivalence about the revenge of the gatekeepers because he has to acknowledge that, of course, I made the decision to publish the Steele report, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So you see him in the, what's the other phrase he uses towards the end? I mean, he says it's frightening. What Twitter did is a frighteningly disproportionate response, right? So he does use that kind of language, and it's a totally contradictory kind of editorial where he's just trying to paper over the obvious. And it's interesting because he feels the need to do that. And that's interesting. I mean, that's a little silver lining in this crap show that is what's going on with the media, because he knows that there's exposure here to anyone paying attention. Now, things are being revealed that can't be hidden. So the fact that he feels the need to write this at all is somewhat interesting to me. It makes no sense. You see this a lot with younger authors on the left now. For instance, the woman who wrote the piece on free speech in the New York Times, really against free speech, that mentioned Claremont a week or so ago. It's very similar, right? It's this kind of faux earnest, I'm trying to do the both sides thing. But really, I love what they're doing in Europe, and we really need to censor everyone all the time. Mm-hmm. But then you also say a number of things that contradict that, and you don't have to establish any kind of logical thread that makes the distinctions that would allow for this to actually say something worthwhile. So this is not, it's not really a discourse that's intended to persuade anyone. It's more like a cover-up. It's more like a veil, like throwing a veil over the chinks in the armor. And you see that a lot, I think, with the younger lefties. And that's what this is. I mean, it's laughable, right? It makes no sense whatsoever. Mm-hmm. But why is he even writing this, right? It'd be better not to say anything at all. Mm-hmm. But they feel the need to kind of paper over or cover up these contradictions, I think.
We have to churn out weekly copy, right? So I just wish I hope his boss sends him a memo saying, if you're deeply ambivalent about the return of the gatekeepers, I'm somewhat ambivalent about your new paycheck for one of the gatekeepers.
Yeah, well, the gatekeepers aren't who he pretends they are in this piece, right? He pretends that the gatekeepers are those who sort of in good faith protect the public against the dangers that arose from kind of letting loose the floodgates when social media and places like BuzzFeed came into the fore. Then it turned out that we were worried people might get hoodwinked by, all sorts of very sophisticated international actors that want to thwart American interests. And so the gatekeepers initially were stymied by this because they were sort of technologically a couple steps back, but then they rose to the occasion, and now, we can trust that they are. And that frames the gatekeepers as these kind of purely textual media and, newspapermen, old newspapermen in a world of sort of digital renegades, protecting us against the hazards of digital renegadery. But that's not the case at all, as is evidenced by BuzzFeed itself, by the journey of BuzzFeed from new media outlet to thoroughly captured kind of apparatus of the deep state. The gatekeepers exist to enforce the old world order in the new digital sphere. And they can do that in any number of ways. They can do it as with the authority of the New York Times behind them, broadcasting from every available orifice of their sort of massive disinformation body. They're broadcasting the lie that America is racist, but they can also do it in cute listicles, and they can do it in the form of a sort of algorithm that on Twitter selects against conservatives and for leftists. All of these things are part of actual gatekeeping, actual insistence on the part of people, of elites who once held power and are now losing it, insistence upon their own way over and against the admittedly somewhat chaotic toss and churn of human beings discovering that they've been lied to and attempting to share information with one another using new tools that they never had before to circumvent this hugely un-American and studiously anti-human propaganda campaign. And so the gatekeepers are not actually just these kind of bespectacled, kind, visor-wearing, experts, but instead ruling class elites who are very, very skillful at incorporating other sort of people who are slightly outside of their class into their class and addicting them to the prestige that comes with old fancy names like the New York Times. I mean, you look at the way even that people who are now catching wise to what's happening on the left cannot proclaim that the only solution to their problems is to vote red in this election. I mean, you look at the way that people publish lengthy articles describing in great detail and with some perspicacity, some sort of acute attention to detail, the way that the left has become furiously anti-human and prejudiced, anti-Semitic even. You see those very, very well-written and careful long think pieces that go right up to the edge of saying, and therefore the left must be opposed at all costs despite the sort of unpalatability of Donald Trump, and then say nothing, and then just back away from saying the obvious conclusion to the fact that Joe Biden will offer no resistance to the radicals on the left, right? The obvious conclusion to that is, well, you got to vote in, unfortunately, you got to vote in this ugly orange guy, that nobody will say that. Why? Because if they do, they will not be invited back to the cocktail parties. And we just don't understand how hypnotic that is and how alluring it is. and the way in which this sort of amoebic ruling class of actual gatekeepers is capable of capturing anybody with even a shred of public spirit.
There's such a double game afoot. I would even go so far as to say that the gatekeepers' self-conceptualization that they present to the public of being gatekeepers, where I, a journalist with ethical integrity, will cop to the fact that, to a degree, I am slightly uncomfortable with being a member of the gatekeeping class. But after all, don't we need some gatekeepers? And well, it happens to be us. And who are you going to trust, us or like the 400-pound Nazi in the parents' basement, right? They're not first and foremost gatekeepers, and their conceptualization and presentation of themselves as a gatekeeping class is itself, I would suggest, a yet another fantasy that they spin, which is what they really do. Yes, there's a lot of lying flying around, and there's a lot of heavy breathing about distinguishing between truth and lies. But for me, that itself is yet another way in which the discourse ruling class characterizes things in a way that is designed to make people talk about something that's not really going on. What's really going on is the dreaming of certain dreams and the propagation of those dreams and fantasies and imaginative artifacts, and then broadcasting them out and making people adopt them. That's how they use media, communications media, to rule. And part and parcel of that process is by presenting themselves and framing themselves and the work that they do and the stakes involved in that work in a way other than what it really is. So as annoying as it is when you see some bald-faced lie march across your feed or across your newspaper in 32-point font or whatever it is, a lie is oftentimes clearly a lie. And when you encounter a lie that is self-evidently a lie, you tend to know what to do with it. Whereas what is really just filling the internet to the point of bursting is things that are not necessarily lies, but things that are definitely memes or memeable visions or dreams or thought nuggets. And it's the sea of this stuff that we are made to sail on, I think even more so than transparent lies, that has caused so many normal/ordinary people, as well as freaks and misfits, to together climb into the internet and say, we can't parse this information. We don't have the time. We don't have the quote unquote expertise. We don't have the energy. We don't have the inclination. And there's no real sign of a payoff in doing the work of crawling through the news and trying to figure out what is real and what is not, and what is someone's opinion and what is more than an opinion, and what is just kind of like a meme that is designed to brainworm its way into our heads and move us around like puppets. Nobody really wants to do that. But in the absence of doing that, you have to somehow orient yourself in information space. And that's what the big sort of populist wave of content is. It's people spending their precious time on the internet talking amongst themselves about what the hell happened during the Vegas shooting. Something which has not really come on a raft of lies. There was some reportage out there about some guy and his gun collection, but it was just, it didn't add up, and there was no real attempt to provide an official narrative. So in addition to just having these memes being heaped upon us day in and day out by narrative weavers, we also have these gaping holes where we would expect narratives to be and where there's just kind of this void. And in order to navigate this bizarre terrain, people take it upon themselves to start constructing their own narratives among voices that they trust, neighbors, friends, colleagues, fellow closeted Trump supporters, or even sort of bizarre strangers hiding in the internet. Those people sometimes seem to have more credibility and more authority than the narrative spinners that you see, on television or at a White House press conference. The lies are a big part of it. I think, sometimes journalists like talking about the post-truth environment that we're in. Well, it's because most of what they do has moved out of knowledge work and into fantasy work. And people are responding to that. I think they're continuing to respond to it with the Hunter Biden stuff, which, as I said before, this is like part of the Jeffrey Epstein expanded universe, the dark underbelly of the corrupt elite, and the stories that they tell designed to distract us away from what's really going on. I'm sure that we'll talk some more about what all this means for Election Day. But I think, if there's any trend that seems to me to have big political significance that's going to power through this election and beyond, it's this one. It's the new ways that ordinary people and strange people alike are orienting themselves in internet space against the wishes and even without regard to the narrative spinning class.
There's a key, James, I think, to the profundity of what you're saying in the...
I hope so.
Somewhere. Allow me to attempt to hand it to you. There's a key to the profundity of what you're saying in the image that you used to describe our kind of mental picture of the guy that gatekeepers portray themselves as acting against. You said something like the 400-pound basement dweller, right? This idea that the big baddie here is a video game playing, even a video game addicted person who's never moved out of his parents' apartment with no responsibilities and no self-accountability other than to pump out disinformation at all times. That very image, which is one that conservatives themselves traffic in all the time, they sort of tend to defend in defense of the basement dweller against the legacy media. But in fact, if you look at who these people actually are, if for a moment you take off the narrative visors and you go into the halls of these kind of independent media creators, more often than not, they're jacked, married family men and women with like a genuine, with an emphasis on personal accountability and sort of and putting oneself and one's home into order, and the obese, isolated, basement dwellers are in fact right out there in front of us, running the New York Times, running the media, right? Those people are the ones who even parade openly the fact that they have no interest in physical health, the fact that they endorse and celebrate their own obesity, their own disconnection from their natural human impulses. All of those things are like fully on display among the very people who tell you that their, evil opponents are the ones weighing 400 pounds, eating Cheetos in the basement. And the fact that we haven't even grokked that, the fact that we just kind of still conceive of this as a battle between svelte elites and video game playing Twitch streamers is like itself the power of the narrative that you're describing.
So we should reserve plenty of time for election talk as it's a few days out. But I just wanted to, James, your evocative phrase about weavers of lies, well, puts me in mind of, I won't go there, science fiction. But it actually reminds me of another good term would be, it just puts in my mind the notion of a loom of lies. And then I'll also say in terms of alternative media and decidedly non-gatekeepers who get more views than even Tucker on any given podcast or YouTube of that podcast. Joe Rogan had both Kanye West on for 3 hours this week and Alex Jones on for, I think, close to 3 hours as well. Both for very different, for different reasons. And if you're a glutton for such punishment, both are worth listening to. But let's talk about the election. So we will all vote, America, on Tuesday.
If we haven't already.
Multiple right.
Times,
no, I mean, many of us have voted already. I haven't yet. But in this era of, much more mail-in voting, I think, what was the number? I think 70 million people have cast a ballot already, which is up. Not, I don't think, astronomically from 16, but up somewhat from 16. Trump is, barnstorming the Rust Belt, especially Pennsylvania. Biden is kind of hiding still, but occasionally doing press events in places like Georgia to a bunch of socially distanced reporters, as far as I could tell, and with some weird overhead shots of them in little white circles so that they're distanced. The Daily Wire, I think it was Daily Wire, maybe it might have been the Daily Caller, cheekily asked, what is going on here with an overhead shot of like a bunch of white circles, reporters in them, a stage. There's like a campfire there. Clearly they were at some sort of camp site that they were using as the site for this interview. And I said it looked like a ritual suicide for a cult.
Yeah.
The circles were so the mothership could identify them, and some press were there for coverage. And they had clearly all just gathered around the campfire for their last rites. But what do we all think? Trump, Biden, we take no official position here at Claremont and don't endorse candidates, but our longtime listeners know our general leanings. But what do we all think? Peterson, you feeling bullish, bearish, somewhere in between, depending on the day of the week?
So, I mean, it's almost a cliche in analyst circles at this point, but I think it's absolutely true. There is no way to confidently call this one, and the range of possibilities that you see as plausible is just too large. It really is. So I've always been of the inclination, and I if I really go with my gut, I think that Trump will win the Electoral College. On the other hand, I can easily see that not happening for a variety of reasons in a variety of scenarios. The other problem is that even if he loses the popular vote and wins the Electoral College, this is going to play out most likely not just on election night, as we all know. It's going to drag on. And the longer anything drags on in politics, when leadership over the most powerful country in the world is at stake, the more shenanigans will take place that then alter anything you might predict. So, in other words, this is not going to be your normal constitutional process. You've slow played the election, and therefore there is interference possible by governors, by lawyers, etc. So it's a complete and utter show. It's purposely that way. We've known this for a long time. What I would say is a couple things. One is my feeling going into it. I hope listeners out there feel the same way. You got to get to this place where you get eerily peaceful as we move into the next phase of American life between November 3rd and Inauguration Day. And I hope, those who listen to us probably can get there. You have a better chance than a lot of people who are going to be even more anxious and full of anxiety than they have been with the virus in the next few months. And the place is this, right? You get to the place where there's this crushingness that comes upon everyone because of the kind of existential crisis. You see what's about to unfold. You see how bad it is. But then once we start to go over the waterfall, as I call it, you can have a kind of an eerie peace. Like, look, no one of us is in charge of what's about to happen. We all do the best we can. And I feel right now, a lot of love. I feel a lot of love and peace because I feel like I'm in the barrel with a bunch of my friends, and the barrel's about to go over Niagara Falls. And as soon as it starts going, you just got to be peaceful because you don't know what's going to happen, right? And it's not up to you. We're all going to woo, or as they do in the cartoons, yahoo! Like we're going to go down the cliff. And then there's going to be a lot of swirling and churning waters, and then we're going to have to navigate again. And we're right on the precipice of this, and we will see what happens. Now, a lot of questions will be answered even on Election Day, even if the results, as is most likely, both because they won't be announced and because they won't be clear, will not be clear generally. So, but what we will find out is a lot of answers to the trends that everyone's been talking about, and one of them is, for instance, how far did the middle class, upper middle class, aspiring middle class, who's scared crapless at their overlords and mastards, how scared were they? How many of them stayed with Trump or stayed Republican? How far does this real turn on the part of minority groups towards Trump go? What's the depth of that, right? All these kind of more superficial but serious electoral questions will be answered fairly quickly, actually, and we'll get a sense of that, I think. But I think for the psychological health of a lot of people out there, you have to realize just how bad the situation is, how close we are to real constitutional crisis, and then B, find a place of peace within that as the new normal. And if you can do those things, you're going to be far ahead of everyone else, because most of the country is about to realize how far we've fallen.
So Matt's very calm on this podcast. I've mentioned Joe Rogan, despite the fact that we don't smoke marijuana here on this podcast at the Roundtable.
No, but I am drinking Jack, and you're drinking peanut butter.
Spencer,
whiskey.
no, do not out me. Producer Jake brought. They don't sponsor the show. What's it called?
Screwball.
Screwball, yeah, which is peanut butter whiskey. I will say nothing against Jake Gannon. He's a young lad, but
I, on the other hand, am drinking rosé.
Oh my God, Matt is one of the ladies who lunch. You guys remember that Sondheim song?
Matt's drinking.
I'm drinking rosé because I feel like it, and it's great. Right?
He's drinking a
delicious,
rosé
I'm a
from
little
like
from
I
Long
said,
Duck.
you have to get into that place.
that peaceful place.
The peanut butter whiskey is disgusting.
This is a time. This is not a time to panic. It's not a time to be frenetic and frenzied. You have to be calm and clear-eyed about what's going on.
Booze is actually the good choice because, as we all know from what we read about otherwise horrible news about drunk driving accidents, et cetera, is the drunk one's nice and loose. So if you're all in the barrel, if you tense up, that's when you get hurt.
Exactly.
You just got to go with the flow.
Exactly. That's very true. Stay limber. Stay limber.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, James.
Nope. You go ahead. No, you go ahead. It is interesting to me that even this election, with its very high stakes and its general tenor of insanity, and even the pollsters show that there are basically evenly divided support in like 5 or 6 states.
Yeah.
It's very close. It's very intense. It's very crazy. And the gloves are off. And despite all of these things, it is fruitless feeling to succumb to like the full craziness that is down the alley beckoning toward you. Like, it just doesn't result in anything. Mm-hmm. You can give in to that kind of panic and give into that psychic break, but there's no payoff for it. And despite the fact that we've kind of seesawed with street riots and I think it speaks to how fabricated and mashed and how astroturfed that they are. That there really doesn't seem to be an organic public mood of craziness and frothiness. Some people are standing out on the street corner waving their signs and people honk at them. But in the final days here, it seems like the really violent and nasty people are the usual sort of Antifa BLM suspects, and beyond that, there's not much. There's a bunch of people sort of sitting down and waiting to see how this shakes out and trying to process things a day at a time and make sure that their personal lives and the lives of those who they care about don't go off the rails. I think that speaks well of America, and I think it also speaks to the way that our technological landscape really is reworking us away from the kind of insanity that was a daily drumbeat during peak TV and film conditions. Everyone running around in the streets trying to get everything on video. Some of that's been going on over the course of the summer, and Matt's talked about how important it is to have new kinds of media companies that can channel the eyewitness reports of ordinary people into package that can be delivered to audiences. But overlaying all that, is I think a growing understanding that endless amounts of explanation, endless amounts of grandstanding, endless amounts of logging on and trying to force the world to agree that you have finally understood the whole in a way that explains it all. All of that is beginning to result in burnout among audiences and among normal people. And I think that what comes next could be more consequential but in perhaps surprising ways. It may well be that despite whatever craziness ensues, the real action is going to be in the quieter workings of ordinary people making decisions around the kitchen table and acting on them, and building a new life for a new age.
It's interesting to me that everybody is so calm. I
realize that the fundamental premise is, right?
I do, of course, that everything's going to
accepted-
go insane. Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
you ingest the black pill and then you break on through the other side.
Well,
to
no,
quote
I mean-
Seinfeld, serenity now, insanity later.
No, I mean, I'm not. I'm actually not, despite the tone of my voice, which is always just slightly sarcastic. Somebody once asked me, someone said to me, I can never tell if you're being sarcastic or serious, and the answer is, it's always both. But no, despite the fact that the tone of my voice is slightly sarcastic, I genuinely actually have felt something quite similar, and yeah, it is premised on the sheer. I mean, what we're really in is a radical moment in the original sense of the word. We're in a moment that chases us down to the roots of our project together as citizens. We're in a moment that demands we sort of dredge up all of these old questions that we thought we had settled, but then in our kind of absence, they got completely unsettled. These questions about like why am I an American and also the Democrat in New York is an American? Why are those two things the same? And do any of these standard answers to that question still hold? Those questions, which kind of define what you would call civic friendship, are up for debate. And when such things go up for debate, then you have the ingredients for real turmoil. And I think that because everybody on this podcast has been pretty clear-eyed about that for a long time, at this point, it feels a little bit as if it's all over but the shouting. It feels as if we've all said our piece. Everybody has written and said the words that we feel will be astute and helpful in this time. And everybody is now kind of waiting to see, because now ultimately the efforts that we might expend have been expended, and the final effort is the vote, and then you do that, and once that's expended, not to get all weepy about it, but it is actually up to God, right? I mean, we used to do more God talk on this podcast. We're all some form of Christian, I think, and when people say God's in control, I think that sometimes what they mean is like it's all going to turn out okay. That's not what I mean by that at all. It's something.
It's what the founders meant by providence, right?
Yeah,
At some point,
yeah.
it's up to something beyond you.
Right. And unfortunately, one of the things that you discover, I mean, this has been one of my big takeaways from the book of Isaiah over these many years that I've been working on it. Like one of the things that you discover is that God's in control often means like God is making calculations that are so much grander in scope than your own day-to-day concerns, that even though God is actually working all things out for the good, like sometimes bad times do come. And so the role, I think, of somebody that believes that genuinely believes that we are part of a large story which is about the salvation and liberation of the human person, is to fight for those things in all times. I mean, we just don't see what's about to happen. And once you have done your fighting and are committed to continuing to do that fighting come what may, there is a peace which passes understanding. Because what else are you going to do? You're not going to not do that, right? None of us here is going to not fight for the essential things of the American regime, which are personal, which are liberty, civic liberty, and equality under the law, and those. Yeah.
I mean, don't you think? I mean, well, first off, my favorite example of this is by someone who's probably not the most pious man in the world, but I think I've mentioned it at least once before on the podcast. My favorite moments in all of human history is when Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Recall walked out of the voting booth after voting for himself and just said, "It is up to the God now."
Yeah, and that's right.
I'd forgotten about that.
I think it is up to the God now. I think he meant Crom. I think that's the God he worships. But yeah, exactly. But so here's my. And first off,
what is your idea of happiness?
All of you in the next few days, we still have lots of work to do with the American mind. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
And I have not written anything close to what I want to say about the election, and maybe you won't get a chance, which is fine. But here's what I think. I think that my worry in the midst of this discussion, and I'm curious what people think about this, is that we are, flatter ourselves. We're a little bit ahead of the game if we're right. There's 330 million people in this country, and a whole hell of a lot of them are living in denial. It's not just the elites. The elites, of course, are living in denial, kind of willful denial that things aren't this bad, everything's going to be fine. But there's a lot of people in the base, in MAGA world, and also in the base on the left, who think, of course, Trump's going to lose, of course, Trump's going to win. I have never seen in my lifetime that kind of surety, and you see it all the time online. So you have people on both sides who are absolutely convinced their side's going to win and it's going to be a landslide. Now, probably they're both wrong in this case. And there's a lot of people in this country from the top to the bottom, however you want to categorize it, who do not realize the kind of crisis that we are in right now. And they're slowly coming to be red-pilled. And that's already a cliche term for us, right? We don't even use the term red-pilled anymore. I mean, Curtis Yarvin himself says that's a terrible thing. He's way over it. Like, we're all cool. This is a problem. Most of the country has not grappled yet with the dangerous situation that we are in. And this is an internal domestic divide that's only going to grow. So I do think that what we need to be concerned about is navigating what happens as the waters churn. And this election is going to be an enormous wake-up call, even more than 2016 was, to a hell of a lot of people in this country who are going to start to realize that something is deeply, deeply awry. And that's just, I think it's inevitable. It's inexorable. It's what the story of the next 6 months are going to be. It's going to be one big horrible lesson for people that things are not well. And we forget, right, that most folks aren't quite there yet. Let me say one more thing and I'll stop. What I think is most interesting in when you think of American mind and people who have something to say is this fact. Right now, highly competent professionals in tech and finance who are non-woke, right? So your elites, in other words, who lean the right way or quietly pro-Trump or quietly see what's going on. Let me just tell you something. They all are thinking very, very dark thoughts about where this country is headed. I had another conversation this week with someone who I agreed with, who highly competent professional, I won't say which, in either tech or finance, who is quietly, not on the woke side of things. And they'll just say matter-of-factly in private, this country is going to need a peaceful separation in some way. And so these are the people who see where we're going, but that has not translated yet to the base. We don't have the leaders, and we can't even talk about this kind of stuff in public yet. And on both sides, I think this is the case. And I'll shut up there.
Yeah, it's Spencer was taking a breath before.
No, go ahead.
No. I wanted to get David Barr involved. He's in a position. He's in a position most of us aren't. Well, for one thing, we're all on the West Coast and Barr's late night. Always, we record this at 5 p.m. Pacific on Thursday or Wednesdays usually. So we appreciate Barr's forbearance. But David, what are you seeing? You're in sort of upper middle class, professional, greater Beltway circles, socially and geographically. What do they all think? My big worry, and it's playing off of Matt, is that the media barrage over the last 3 months has been so overwhelmingly, Biden's got it in the bag, 14-point lead, 12-point lead, could take Texas, that, I'm not overly worried about Barr's neighbors leading an insurrection. That's not the style of the...
I am right.
Oh, David is. Yeah. But yeah, there's this huge expectation gap, I fear, Matt, led by the media. And, who knows how it plays out across the classes and across the voter spectrum. But I'm just curious what David sees out in the burbs, the DC
because
burbs.
I've been quarantined. My vantage point.
He knows nothing. Yeah. He's been locked in the basement.
I'm
like
good
Biden.
for nothing. But I do watch carefully my friends on Twitter. So friends that are professionally on the left, so that work for members, Democratic House members and Senate, etc. And I think the way to answer your question is to track their rhetoric over time and the way they speak about Biden's victory. I think there's a kind of not like desperation, but like a kind of fear that's seeping in that maybe things really aren't as foregone as the media would like to have the American public think. So I think that they do worry that that Trump has a real fighting chance in this whole game, and I think that it's they're starting to get angry, and so you just watch the reactions on Twitter to little things, and that's kind of what I've been doing.
Yeah, that's actually healthy in a way. I mean, they're sort of resigned to re-election.
Well, they're acknowledging,
or they can accept it.
They're acknowledging the. So one thing, just real quick. I mean, I didn't give my ultimate bit of advice or takeaway would be, I think if we wanted to get into predictions, what we know for sure, or at least I think I know for sure, is that either way, you're going to see the further radicalization and the heightening of the divide in the country. And for instance, this week I talked to a guy who said, yeah, I live in, I think it was Connecticut, somewhere like that. You realize what's going to happen if Trump wins. Mm-hmm. And if you think that these people are going to accept the status quo and stick with it, you're nuts. And I think he's absolutely right? I mean, we all know this. If you think that this is going to be a normal election in the sense that the side that loses is just going to take it, you're wrong. And you will see, if you think what happened in Trump the last 4 years was bad, what's going to happen in the next 4 years if he wins is not just going to be media ops. It's not just going to be rhetorical media ops about how he's illegitimate. It will be action. And it will be action of the kind that we have not even seen before from the left. You're going to see corporations and powerful entities being encouraged by the woke left to take more radical actions than anyone can imagine right now. And on the other end of it, if Biden wins, you're going to see the American right most likely get to a point that it has never been in. It's never been in before. And it's going to also, people are going to realize they have to take action as well. I could be wrong. I mean, you could have the American right roll over. I'm not wrong about the left, I will say. Yeah, that's 100%. Matt. But the American right could just roll over. But I think if Biden wins, you're going to see the radicalization. So you're going to see a further awakening and a further red pilling of America. Yeah.
But Matt, can I push back on that really quick?
Go ahead.
The left, the professional left, and I mean this seriously, they're kind of stupid. So do you really think that they have the wherewithal to launch a sustained attack, the kind of which is meant to just disembowel the intellectual right and the right simply?
I think that, so look what's happening right now when people get ostracized, right? In these kinds of times, when you speak out of line on your side, the most radical members of your side say, what the hell are you doing? It's wartime. You got to get into this, right? You see that in the left in a wild way right now. Imagine if Trump wins. All this talk about, social credit system and all this stuff that woke capital deals with. The left is going to be very angry. A lot of those elites who are more business types will also be very angry. Their authority is being directly challenged. There's a finger in their face again. And the only argument you can make against this, I think, would be to say, well, the business guys would say, and the establishment left, okay, we have to acknowledge like we did something wrong. We let this guy win again. But I don't think that's what's going to prevail. In other words, the woke left is going to provoke, if Trump wins, woke capital to actually take more radical actions, not words, not ops, not just media organizations talking about how there's a P-tape with Trump. They're going to actually actively oppose, and the blue states as well, are going to take actions to actively oppose the Trump administration in ways that we can't even imagine right now, that go far beyond what's happened in the last 4 years.
I don't know if I could offer a dissenting view on that. Yeah. What could happen? I mean, look, the corporate entities, well, they'll do that if they think that Trump even re-election is a blip, and that ultimately the tide is turning and will turn in the direction of wokeness, and so they best get on board. But I mean, alternatively, well, I wouldn't say all of them, but there could be a sort of faction of the Fortune 100 and 500 who make the calculation. Okay, look, we're kind of in, we're in what we thought we were in for many years now. Trump was not an inflection, was not an aberration on the inevitable rise of liberal dominance, but rather we are really sort of a permanently, generationally, for a generation divided country. And so I have a little more room now after a Trump election and then a Trump re-election, and I'll ask for everyone's predictions momentarily, especially if it's slightly more convincing than last time, where they have a little room to say, look, this is a divided consensus country, and we can straddle both sides, and we sell to both sides.
It's a possibility, but the reason that I don't see it happening is because it's unlikely that it's a wave. Or a victory the victory would have to be large. That could easily happen. Like I said, you can't predict this. I can see plausible scenarios in which it does. But clearly the narrative from the left, and the problem is it's not just the woke left, even the business guys have already gone bonkers.
Sure.
And if it's close at all, the narrative is going to be Trump stole the election, et cetera, et cetera. And also the deplorables are saying F you again. And all these, racist pieces of crap need to be put down. I mean, so it would be great, I think, if that's what happened. I do think that this heightening of the divide will actually cause a minority of people in the establishment, left or within business, to break, at least quietly in their minds. They'll go, okay, I disagree with this stuff, and I actually will secretly support the other side. That I think will happen. But to actively break the back of culturally the left and break the back of woke capital with this election, it's hard to imagine.
Yeah, no backbreaking. I agree with that completely.
Are you asking for predictions?
Yeah, let's do predictions. So I'll lead.
Go ahead.
So 2016 electoral map, but with Minnesota and Nevada added. That's my prediction. And Trump narrowly winning the popular vote.
You scooped. Tell me what you
love it.
Ryan, you scooped. Tell me what you really think. Substack.
Sorry.
No,
Spencer.
it's fine. It's fine. It's all right.
No, that's coming out next week.
That'll be next
week.
week.
I was a little more reserved, but I've settled into my
You've
bullishness.
now just stated it out.
Well, and one leading factor, and this is why the upper Midwest is interesting and why he'll probably win Arizona again. These college campuses are not back. In Madison, Wisconsin, at the big campuses in Minnesota. I might not be completely right on all this, but a lot of the big schools, they're remote, they're not back in session, and they're huge vote banks for Democrats and turnout banks. And they're going to
didn't know that.
Yeah, they're going to get mailed their ballots, at their dorms, or I don't know. A lot of these kids are not going to vote. So that helps. It doesn't help with the narrative, which Matt has outlined, which is it'll just be, Trump won because of voter suppression or voter absence. But hey, it's democracy, folks. You show up and vote. If you can't, there's little excuse. It's not that hard in this day and age. But that will contribute, I think, in the upper Midwest. And the riots across Minnesota and the few in Wisconsin. I mean, I've got to think that my fellow Americans, even in the suburbs, even given their predilection to not like Trump, given what we see from demographics in the suburbs outside big cities, cannot like, for example, in Wisconsin, mobs roaming through their suburban neighborhoods, throwing bricks through windows as signaling their commitment to anti-racism. And the riots in Philly are now day 2 and in full force. So anyway, that's my prediction.
Matt?
After saying it's impossible to predict, I don't know. I think most likely is I do think a Trump victory that's strong enough to be clear, but also not strong enough, of course, to be disputed. And there's going to be, so we're in this peaceful moment right now, just before we go over the waterfall.
Not strong enough not to be disputed.
Confusing statement. I'll rephrase.
No, I know.
But so we got this week where we're just quietly going to go over the waterfall. First off, there's going to be a couple crazy things that happen in the next 7 days. There's no doubt about it. Even outside the emails or whatever, there's going to be at least
inevitable.
one or two wild things that happen right up until the end in the media. Whether they go anywhere or not is anyone's guess. And then you got the election itself, that's going to be an enormous controversy because people are going to try and be threatening to silence Trump. Both candidates are going to want to declare victory in certain key states on the night of the election, and it's probably wise of them to do that.
Right.
Both of them.
Yeah.
So that is all noise that's going to increase. And then you're going to have a few governors do some odd things, et cetera. But I do kind of think, as far as the election itself goes, I think that Trump actually does have the edge to win at least handily, with the proviso that there's going to be a number of asterisks that the left is going to glob onto.
Yeah, Spencer.
Well, first of all, I've refused answering this question so many times in the past several weeks. I want you to take it as a symbol of my devotion to the American mind.
Thank you,
to the
sir.
Claremont Institute, that I am going to answer it.
Yeah, I feel like that's exactly
Right. So all of us, I'm sure, are in this boat that we've not answered the question until this moment. I think that Trump's going to win. I do. I think he's going to win. I think that one thing this election will be, to use a hackneyed phrase, a referendum on, is the extent to which pollsters, and I include among pollsters all of the various experts who have built their careers on being able to use calculations to predict how American life is going to play out.
We see you, Mike Murphy.
Yeah, exactly. We see you, Mike Murphy. We see you, Nate Silver. We see all the people, I mean, because as James has very eloquently argued in an essay that you should read, OK Pollster, inherent in polling is the idea that if perfected, this science will eliminate the need for
science,
technology. This is a science that will eliminate the need for free will on the part of individual citizens
And voting, really.
Yeah. And one of the things that I have been arguing for repeatedly is that polls proceed from certain assumptions, and that those assumptions are themselves really the content of the polls, and everything else, despite being vaguely correlated to the outcome of the thing predicted, is secondary to. When Nate Silver said, I have the following set of prior assumptions about how this thing is working. I mean, our polling classes have a set of assumptions about how America looks. And those assumptions were the ones that were completely upended by 2016. And the question on the table is, did those assumptions get revised, or did the polling classes simply retrench themselves in them, dig into them? And it is my opinion that they've retrenched themselves, and that all of the polls that are now coming out are representative not of a revision post 2016, but actually of a doubling down post 2016. And that the poll, as wrong as the pollsters were proven in the past, they'll be proven yet more wrong now. Not that will settle anything, but simply that is what's about to happen to us. And it's been my experience thus far that I have, it's a matter of ethics. It's not merely a matter of science, but a matter of ethics that one agree with what the polls believe. People get very convinced of this on the right and on the left. And that, I think, is about to be shattered, which will be very unsettling. Anyway, Trump's going to win.
Yeah, the things to watch will be the tightening the polls, which happened last time in the final. And when this podcast comes out, Thursday, Friday, nationally, which, they tightened to about 3 points, which Hillary pretty much hit, not quite, but almost. And then the state polls, which were wrong in the Rust Belt and the Midwest by between 4 and 6 points in Trump's favor. So, James Pullis, what do you think?
269.
Yes.
The limits of my powers of perception.
Yeah. So that's a Pennsylvania loss, but an Arizona win. I forget actually the line.
There are a couple. Different paths. There are a couple different paths to it, which is why plausible. I can't shake the idea.
Yeah. The tie,
very plausible,
which most of our listeners, savvy as they are, know, would mean it's thrown to the House, where every state votes by delegation. They all get one vote, and for now, we have a 2-state delegation lead, 26 to 24. Interesting. What do you think, Barr?
It's depressing for me to say this, but I think that Biden will win the presidency, and I think that we're going to lose the Senate.
All right. Yeah.
I don't want to
No, I hear.
I really, this is just because I've been in a Eeyore kind of mood recently with COVID and stuff, and I don't know. It's a premonition, but my stupid premonitions are wrong anyway. Thank God. And I hope I'm wrong about this, but I do think that Biden, but I don't think it's a fair. Again, with the caveat that there have been the people have not with mail-in ballots. I think that there's been enough gaming of this that I do worry that I am convinced that I think that he's going to pull it off.
Yeah, the cheating is a problem. There's 3 days now in Pennsylvania they'll extend the counting, and then the Supreme Court just declined today to take up North Carolina's extension of 9 days. So look, there's always room for shenanigans. I will say, Barr, that your view is the consensus view from few of our fellows who are in and around DC who are close to not the campaign, but sort of old watchers of electoral politics. It's he's lost too many seniors, and COVID was bungled just in the sense of messaging. It was not serious enough, and then too serious, and that's sort of so no one knows. With the riots, they were handled sort of with too light a hand, and then too much of a hand, and sort of it's betwixt and between on two major issues. That is, the summer riots and COVID are just enough to flip some constituents that really matter. So,
one quick question about the riots is how many? I wonder. I haven't been able to find a good answer to this. How many of the mail-in? How many ballots had been cast prior to this
Philadelphia? You mean prior to Philadelphia?
Prior to, I guess there have been so many riots.
Yeah, mail-in voting has not been going on that long. The encouraging numbers out of Florida are that the Democrats are not where Hillary was at this time last cycle, and that the Republicans are sort of plus 300,000 by mail-in. And I don't quite know how they measure all this, but we just all are reliant on our sources for these sorts of things. Most of them public. I don't have any, inside sources, but it looks like in Michigan and Florida, the early voting results, as far as they can fathom them, are not as favorable to Democrats as they would have hoped. But who knows? Nobody knows anything in these things. Yeah. As Matt said, we're all going over the waterfall. Grip your loved ones in the barrel, but don't tense up too much, because you're better able to weather the blow. Thank you all for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to learn more, visit our websites at americanmind.org, claremont.org, and claremontreviewbooks.com. Don't forget to rate, review, and share and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us a positive review, 5 stars. Unless you dislike this, then just go away. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you next week. Oh, wait, I should thank, of course, as always, our production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Annalisa Lee. Oh, wait, but Jake says we're over time, but I don't care.
And
Jake,
like us and subscribe.
Jake, what is your prediction?
My prediction? I predict Trump wins the Electoral College, but loses the popular vote again. And then we just have riots until Inauguration Day.
Okay.
Man, that's a good one too, Jake.
Blurg.
What about Annalisa?
I really liked Spencer's, but what I've been thinking for a few weeks now is that Trump is going to win the Electoral College and just narrowly lose the popular vote.
Okay. All right. So we're all over the map.
Yeah, I do agree with you, Annalisa, on the numbers of it.
I have to say, if I have a second,
go ahead.
My second opinion.
Yeah.
Would be is actually James's scenario. I've thought this similar, that I do think Trump has the edge in the election itself, although there's all kinds of obstacles that are artificial preventing it. But if not, I could easily see a tie vote. And one of the ways in which that could happen, people need to realize, is that Republican governors and the Republican Party can play the same shenanigans the Democrats are. And they've picked up on it in the last month. So that will cause even greater heightening of the divide, because the Democrats, even though they've been telegraphing they're going to do these sorts of things, will be furious when a Republican governor actually says, look, I'm going to pick the electors from my state because of these lawsuits.
Yeah. And I should let everyone know we did a war game with the Texas Public Policy Foundation on the election, and it got thrown to the House. And so if you just Google Ryan Williams and Kevin Roberts, just Ryan Williams, Kevin Roberts and Federalist, we wrote up the executive summary at the Federalist. You can check it out, and it links to our full report, but you'll see the details there. So yeah, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This really does smell like peanut butter.
It tastes like it too.
It's actually really good. Screwball is depressingly good.
Peanut butter?
And much like peanut butter,
that
it
is-
makes you do that.
So sweet though.
Why did you
Is
pour
that
yourself quite
from
so
the
much of it? Is the
Fireball?
question I have.
That was a short pour for me, as you know, Spencer.
Oh, yeah, but-
you're usually pouring me 4 fingers. Yeah. No. Oh God, that is sweet.
No, it's true. I do usually pour you more, but not when I think you're trying.
I kind of want to cut it with some Jack Daniels. It's so sweet.
Wow. I really
Do it.
want to know what that would be like.
No, I don't. It would deface
statement.
Jake's generous offer of Screwball.
No, I kind of want to see you mix it with Jack Daniels now.
Oh, look at the disparate viscosity. It's like oil and water. Should I mix in a little Black Label to round it up?
Yeah. Welcome to Ryan's Blended Whiskey.
It's like, what do we used to call it when you do it at the fountain? Is it a suicide?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, right.
When you just mix all the sodas at Burger King?
Suicide.
Those always tasted better than they had any right to.
My wife, only because of her parents' hippie-ishness, reported to me the other day that she does not think she's ever eaten at Burger King.
What?
Never?
I'm like, are you an American? What
Yeah.
are you talking about?
You threw her in the car at once, right?
Yeah, we're going now.
You're coming with me.
The other great late night,
Dude.
the great late night taco is actually the Jack in the Box taco.
No,
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
With tons of their hot sauce on it. It's good.
I reject the premise.
I don't
of
think
getting
there's
a
actually
taco.
any meat in it. I think it's actually soy meat. Like before that was cool, but it's delicious.
Doesn't matter. what
Doesn't
it is.
matter.
Doesn't matter what it is.
Doesn't matter.
I reject the premise of getting a taco from a burger joint.
But Jake, you can
Jack in the Box is no burger joint.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah,
You're right. It's sub food. So
You
It's,
can get
it's fast casual.
I'm telling you, you can get like a little Chinese food box of just mini tacos, like just a whole.
Oh yeah, the mini tacos are
Thing.
legit.
there has to be something
yeah.
wrong with a Chinese box of many tacos from a burger joint.
What could possibly be wrong with it?
Jack in the Box had the greatest breakfast item ever in the mid '90s, and it was a scrambled egg and cheese and bacon pita pocket. It was delicious. My mother used to bribe us with it before church, so we'd be well behaved. It was delicious.
It's a bad bribe if it's before church. You guys could have gotten it and then misbehaved during
She
church.
then shifted to after church once she learned.
Having learned that exactly that lesson.
That was St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Del Mar, California.
There you go.
Now I'm sure fully woke.
Now it's smoldering ruin.
Dear so-and-so, F you. In Christ, Michael.
Okay, well, I'm ready if you guys are ready.
We've just squandered so much time bantering that David Barr has launched himself into space.
Yeah.
Don't touch your mic. I swear.
All right. Well, then I'm going to get off this bike. No
Jake,
problem.
you're bad for David's health.
Back to the couch bar.
Sit on the couch, potato.
So we've been in the new house a week, and you all know my son's nickname is Bubba, also Bub, but he calls himself those things too. And so the new house is Bubba Newhouse. That's the name of the new house. And like I drop him off at daycare in the morning, and like my first turn out of the driveway, drive up, and then my turn on the other street. The whole time he goes, Bubba Newhouse, Bubba Newhouse, bye, Bubba Newhouse.
Bubba Newhouse, attorney at law.